The other story out today just happened a moment ago, and this has to do with Alina Habba in New Jersey. She has stepped down. What's going on?
Alina Habba was ruled by the Third Circuit earlier this month as having been unlawfully appointed to be the U.S. Attorney for the District of New Jersey. She's somewhat differently situated than Lindsay Halligan because she alone did not walk into a grand jury and seek indictments. She alone did not sign them. At the same time, the import of the recent appellate court decision is that Alina Habba could no longer continue to supervise ongoing cases in the District of New Jersey. It would have essentially frozen her office and all of its prosecutions to a halt. For that reason, Alina Habba says she is now resigning. The Attorney General has accepted her resignation, but has said that she will continue to work with Alina as a senior counselor at the Department of Justice. Katie, I'll note for you that Pam Bondi and Alina Habba appear to be personally as well as professionally close. They were photographed together last night at the Kennedy Center Honors. This is a working relationship that will continue, albeit not in the way that the president, Pam Bondi, and Alina Habba originally intended.
All right, Lisa Rubin, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Coming up next.
Breaking news in the federal legal system today, and this is a story that has massive implications for how our government operates. Alina Habba has officially stepped down from her position as United States Attorney for the District of New Jersey. Now, before I dive into why this matters so much, let me give you some background on what's been happening. The U.S. Attorney position is one of the most powerful legal roles in federal law enforcement. These attorneys represent the federal government in their respective districts, overseeing everything from criminal prosecution to civil litigation. In a state like New Jersey, we're talking about managing hundreds of lawyers and staff members, handling thousands of cases. This isn't some minor administrative role. This is a cornerstone of our federal justice system. So why did Habba resign? The short answer is that multiple federal courts across the country have been striking down these acting U.S. attorney appointments as illegal. Let me explain what happened. The Third Circuit Court of Appeals recently issued a ruling that found Habba's appointment violated federal law. Specifically, they said it broke something called the Vacancies Reform Act. Now, what makes this ruling particularly significant is that it wasn't some partisan decision. The opinion was written by Judge Fizer, who was appointed by President George W. Bush. This was a bipartisan panel of judges all agreeing that the law had been broken. Let me break down what the Vacancies Reform Act actually does, because this is crucial to understanding the whole situation. Back when our country was founded, the framers of the Constitution were very concerned about preventing any one branch of government from having too much power. That's why they created the system of checks and balances we all learned about in school. One of those checks is the requirement that important federal positions need Senate confirmation. The president can nominate whoever they want, but the Senate has to approve that person. This prevents a president from just installing loyalists in powerful positions without any oversight. Now, the framers understood that sometimes you need someone to fill a position temporarily while you're going through the confirmation process. That makes sense, right? You can't just leave an important office empty for months. So there are provisions for temporary acting appointments. But here's where it gets tricky. If you allowed unlimited temporary appointments, a president could just keep cycling through acting officials forever and completely bypass the Senate confirmation process. They could avoid the entire check and balance system. That's exactly what the Vacancies Reform Act was designed to prevent. Congress passed this law to set clear rules about temporary appointments. Under this law, an acting appointee can serve for 120 days, roughly 4 months. After that, they either need to be officially nominated and going through the confirmation process, or they need to step aside. The law gives the president a few options for who can serve in an acting capacity. You can elevate the first assistant who's already in that office. You can designate another Senate-confirmed official from elsewhere in government. Or you can appoint someone from within that office who's been serving at a high level for at least 90 days. But regardless of which option you choose, that 120-day clock is ticking. What the Third Circuit found is that Habba's appointment violated these rules. Her 120 days had expired, she hadn't been officially nominated for Senate confirmation, and yet she was still serving as U.S. Attorney. The court said this clearly broke federal law. Now here's where it gets really interesting. The Third Circuit ruling wasn't happening in isolation. Around the same time, we started seeing similar decisions from federal judges all across the country. It was like a wave of judicial pushback against these questionable appointments. Judge Curry in the Eastern District of Virginia removed Lindsay Halligan from her position as acting U.S. Attorney there. This had immediate and dramatic consequences because Halligan had brought indictments against some very high-profile figures, former FBI Director James Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James. When Halligan was removed, those indictments became legally problematic. Think about it. If the person who brought the charges didn't have proper legal authority to do so, then the validity of those charges is in serious question. You can't prosecute someone when the prosecutor wasn't legally authorized to bring the case in the first place. We've seen similar issues pop up in Nevada, in the Central District of California, and in the Northern District of New York. In New York, there's an acting U.S. attorney named John Sorono, who's facing the exact same problem. Judge Schofield has been holding hearings on this, and from everything that's been reported, she's made it very clear she has concerns about how he was appointed. The pattern here is obvious. Federal judges across the country, appointed by presidents from both parties, are all looking at these appointments and saying the same thing. This violates the law. Now, I want to take a step back and talk about why this matters beyond just the legal technicalities. This goes to the heart of how our government is supposed to function. When the Department of Justice operates properly, it's supposed to be somewhat insulated from direct political pressure. Yes, the Attorney General is a political appointee who serves at the pleasure of the President. U.S. attorneys are also presidential appointees. But there's a reason we have the Senate confirmation process for these positions. That confirmation process serves as a check. It means that the Senate gets to examine the nominees' qualifications, their experience, their judicial philosophy, their ethical standards. Senators can ask tough questions. They can vote no if they think someone is unqualified or inappropriate for the position. When you bypass that process with unlimited acting appointments, you're removing that check on presidential power. You're allowing the president to install whoever they want in these incredibly powerful positions without any meaningful oversight. And the consequences can be serious. We've seen reports that some of these acting U.S. attorneys have been pursuing what appear to be politically motivated investigations. When someone hasn't gone through the confirmation process, when they haven't been vetted by the Senate, when they arguably owe their position entirely to presidential favor rather than qualification and merit, the risk of politicization increases dramatically. Let me give you a specific example. When Alina Habba first took the position as U.S. Attorney for New Jersey, she reportedly made a statement about wanting to turn New Jersey from a blue state to a red state. Now think about that statement for a moment. Should a federal prosecutor be talking about partisan political goals, or should they be focused on enforcing federal law impartially? U.S. attorneys are supposed to prosecute crimes and enforce civil law based on evidence and legal merit, not based on the political affiliation of the targets. The moment you have a prosecutor who sees their job through a partisan lens, the integrity of the entire system is compromised. There have been reports that Habba opened investigations into prominent New Jersey Democratic officials, including the governor and the state attorney general. She went after the mayor of Newark, had him arrested, and then those charges were dismissed. She investigated a member of Congress who had been conducting oversight of a federal detention facility. These actions raise serious questions. Were these legitimate law enforcement matters based on actual evidence of wrongdoing, or were they politically motivated investigations designed to harass political opponents? When you have a U.S. attorney who starts their tenure by talking about changing the political character of the state, and then immediately starts investigating prominent officials from the other party, it's not hard to see why people would be concerned. This is exactly why the Senate confirmation process exists. It's meant to weed out people who are unqualified or who have inappropriate partisan motivations. It's meant to ensure that federal prosecutors are focused on justice, not politics. Now, Habba's situation got even more complicated recently. About 3 weeks ago, she was hit with significant financial sanctions by a federal court. The sanctions were approximately $1 million, and they were imposed on both Habba and Donald Trump for filing what the court determined was a bad faith lawsuit. This was the lawsuit Trump filed against Hillary Clinton and various other defendants when he was still a candidate. The court found that the lawsuit was frivolous and filed in bad faith, meaning it wasn't based on legitimate legal claims, but was instead an abuse of the legal system. The 11th Circuit Court of Appeals upheld those sanctions, meaning a higher court agreed with the assessment. So within the span of just a few weeks, Habba faced 2 major legal defeats from federal appellate courts. First, the sanctions were upheld, then she was removed from the U.S. attorney position by the Third Circuit. This creates an interesting dynamic for the Trump administration. Trump had appointed one of his own criminal defense attorneys, Emil Bove, to serve on the Third Circuit. So now you have a situation where the Department of Justice would potentially need to appeal a decision from a court where one of the president's own appointees is sitting as a judge. That's an awkward position to be in. The administration kept saying they were going to appeal these decisions, but let's be realistic about what an appeal would look like. Even if they took it all the way to the Supreme Court, it's hard to imagine even the current conservative majority endorsing unlimited acting appointments that bypass Senate confirmation. The Supreme Court has certainly been favorable to Trump in many cases, but this would be such a fundamental violation of constitutional principles that it's difficult to see them signing off on it. The Appointments Clause of the Constitution exists for a reason. The Vacancies Reform Act exists for a reason. These aren't minor technicalities, they're fundamental aspects of our system of government. So what happens now with all these acting U.S. attorneys? Based on what we're seeing, it doesn't look like the Department of Justice is going to mount aggressive appeals to save their positions. John Serrano in the Northern District of New York is likely going to be removed. Judge Schofield has made her concerns clear, and she's a well-respected judge. It's hard to see an appellate court overturning her decision on this. Lindsay Halligan's situation in the Eastern District of Virginia is particularly interesting. There seems to be some delay in her removal, and the reason appears to be strategic. From what's been reported, the administration is trying to get new indictments against James Comey and Letitia James from fresh grand juries so that those indictments won't be tainted by Halligan's lack of proper authority. It's a legal chess game. They're trying to preserve the prosecutions while acknowledging that Halligan's appointment was improper. But here's the reality. Halligan is never going to be confirmed as U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia. By most accounts, she lacks the qualifications for the position. She had never served as a federal prosecutor before this appointment. Getting her through Senate confirmation would be virtually impossible. So the administration has decisions to make. With Halligan, it seems like they're prioritizing getting those indictments before they let her go. With the others, they may just have to accept the judicial rulings and move on. Going forward, the process for filling these positions is going to have to change. Under the Vacancies Reform Act, they'll need to elevate the first assistant U.S. attorney in each district. They can't just keep appointing acting U.S. attorneys the way they were doing before, because the law only allows one such appointment and it's limited to 120 days. So they'll promote whoever is serving as first assistant, assuming that person meets the requirements under the law, and that person will serve until the president nominates someone who can go through the full Senate confirmation process. These are major positions we're talking about. The District of New Jersey is one of the largest U.S. attorney offices in the country, probably in the top 5. It handles thousands of cases, employs hundreds of people, and covers one of the most densely populated states in America. You can't just leave a position like that in perpetual limbo with questionable acting appointments. As for what happens to Alina Habba personally, it appears she's not going back to private practice immediately. According to reports, she's been given a position as a senior advisor to Attorney General Pam Bondi, specifically focused on issues related to U.S. attorneys. You could view this as a promotion, or you could view it as a face-saving way to ease her out of the U.S. attorney position. Either way, the practical effect is the same. She's no longer serving as U.S. attorney for New Jersey. In her resignation statement on social media, Habba said something interesting. She stated that people shouldn't mistake compliance with the Third Circuit's ruling for surrender. I'm not entirely sure what that means in practical terms, but the bottom line is clear. She's out of the position. Attorney General Bondi released a statement saying she was saddened by Habba's departure. But this whole situation raises broader questions about the leadership and direction of the Department of Justice right now. Many legal experts and former Justice Department officials have expressed serious concerns about what they see as the politicization of the department. The Department of Justice has traditionally maintained a degree of independence from direct political interference, precisely because its work is so important and so sensitive. When you have prosecutors who appear to be pursuing investigations based on political considerations rather than legal merit, when you have people in these positions who lack traditional qualifications, when you have an administration trying to bypass the Senate confirmation process, it raises fundamental questions about the integrity of our federal law enforcement system. The good news, if there is any in this situation, is that the federal judiciary has pushed back. Judges from across the political spectrum have looked at these appointments and said, no, this violates the law. They've enforced the Vacancies Reform Act. They've reminded the executive branch that there are rules, and those rules apply to everyone. This is the judicial branch doing exactly what it's supposed to do as a co-equal branch of government. It's not about whether these judges like or dislike any particular administration. It's about upholding the law and the Constitution. The Third Circuit didn't rule against Habba's appointment because of her politics or because they disagreed with her prosecutorial decisions. They ruled against it because it violated a clear federal statute. The same is true for all the other judges who have issued similar rulings regarding other acting U.S. attorneys. This is what the rule of law looks like in action. When the executive branch oversteps its legal authority, the courts step in and say stop. That's how the system is designed to work. Looking ahead, the administration is going to need to follow the proper procedures. They'll need to nominate qualified individuals for these U.S. attorney positions. Those nominees will need to go through Senate confirmation hearings. The Senate will examine their qualifications and decide whether to confirm them. In the meantime, the first assistants will need to step up and lead these offices. Hopefully, the administration will nominate people who understand that being a U.S. attorney is about serving justice and enforcing the law, not about pursuing a political agenda. This situation with Alina Habba is now resolved, at least in terms of her no longer serving as U.S. Attorney for New Jersey. But the broader questions about politicization of federal law enforcement, about respect for the appointment and confirmation process, and about the independence of federal prosecutors, those questions remain very much open. The handling of the Lindsay Halligan and John Serrano situations will tell us more about whether the lessons from these judicial rulings have been learned. Will the administration continue to fight these battles in court, or will they accept the rulings and move forward with proper procedures? The rule of law isn't a Republican or Democratic issue. It's not a conservative or liberal issue. It's the foundation that our entire system of government is built upon. When that foundation is threatened, it should concern every American regardless of their political views. Our founders created a system with checks and balances for a reason. They didn't want any one person or any one branch of government to have unchecked power. The Senate confirmation process for important positions like U.S. attorneys is one of those checks. The Vacancies Reform Act, which limits how long acting officials can serve, is another check. When an administration tries to circumvent these checks, when they try to keep acting officials in place indefinitely without going through proper confirmation, they're not just violating a technical rule, they're undermining the fundamental structure of our government. The federal courts have now made it clear that this won't be tolerated. Multiple judges across multiple circuits have all said the same thing: follow the law. It doesn't matter what your political priorities are. It doesn't matter how convenient or inconvenient the rules might be. The law is the law, and it applies to everyone equally. That's a message that every administration needs to hear and respect, not just this one. The precedent being set here is important. Future presidents from both parties need to understand that they cannot bypass the Senate confirmation process through unlimited acting appointments. So where do things stand as of today? Alina Habba has resigned as U.S. Attorney for the District of New Jersey. She's taking on this advisory role with the Attorney General, though it's unclear exactly what that will entail or how much influence she'll actually have. The indictments she was involved with may face legal challenges given the questions about her authority. Other acting U.S. attorneys in similar situations are likely going to be removed from their positions as well. John Serrano is probably next. Lindsay Halligan's situation may drag on a bit longer as the administration tries to salvage those high-profile prosecutions, but ultimately she's not going to remain in that position either. The Department of Justice is going to have to adjust its approach. They'll need to use first assistants as temporary leaders while going through proper nomination and confirmation processes for permanent U.S. attorneys. And hopefully, going forward, we'll see a return to the traditional understanding that U.S. attorneys should be qualified, experienced prosecutors who are focused on enforcing the law fairly and impartially, not on advancing a political agenda. This has been a remarkable series of events that goes to the very heart of how our government functions. It's about more than just one person or one position. It's about whether we respect the constitutional system of checks and balances that has served this country for over 200 years. The courts have spoken clearly on this issue. Now it's up to the executive branch to listen and comply. That's how the system works. That's how it's supposed to work. And when it works properly, when each branch respects its role and respects the law, that's when our democracy is at its strongest. These are the kinds of stories that don't always get the attention they deserve, but they're absolutely crucial to understand. Because when we talk about threats to democracy or concerns about authoritarianism, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about whether the rules apply equally to everyone, whether our institutions can maintain their independence and integrity, and whether the checks and balances in our system actually function when tested. In this case, they did function. The courts stood firm. The rule of law prevailed. And that should give every American, regardless of their political views, some measure of confidence that our system, while imperfect, still has the ability to correct course when it strays from constitutional principles. That's the real story here. Not just that one U.S. attorney resigned, but that our system of government, when challenged, proved resilient enough to enforce its own rules and maintain its own integrity. That's something worth recognizing and defending.